So I'm going to be regularly putting out some videos on my thoughts on the market based off everything that's been happening. I've been trading the markets for over 10 years, and just off the recommendation of a friend, he said that I should probably be, regularly uploading some of my thoughts to YouTube. So it's pretty easy for me to do now because I'm no longer employed. I'm going to be working for myself for probably an extended period of time now. So yeah, I just noticed something today, especially with Bitcoin. So the Nasdaq and SPY have been selling off. The markets have been crashing, but with Bitcoin, especially I guess today, you see that there was a very sharp decline in the Nasdaq and a very sharp decline in the SPY. And this was probably over the last 2 trading days, a 15% decline. As where Bitcoin has been holding above 80,000, and you're starting to see like a bit of a depegging, where there's an unwind of this correlation between, the traditional stock market and Bitcoin. In my opinion, I think, that Bitcoin right now should be sweeping the 60K level, but it's been holding up significantly strong. And even gold, gold sold off today. As with Bitcoin, Bitcoin's up and the Nasdaq has fallen 5%. So I haven't seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that. And what this sort of means is it means that potentially as the traditional markets, are, I guess, unloading, people are starting to look at Bitcoin as a safety asset, or sort of like, a flight to safety asset, where like right now, if I take the paintbrush tool, Bitcoin should have gone with this move. Let's get rid of that. This high here, Bitcoin should have gone down to about like this level with the SPY and with the Nasdaq, and it should be down around 20%. However, it hasn't done that, and instead the brush tool, it kind of halfway through that decline, it came down, and then it just decided to I'm gonna depeg from the Nasdaq and depeg from the SPY in the traditional markets, and I'm gonna hold steady, which is quite interesting. So you can see that the TLT is up 1% on the day. However, the DXY is also up. It's quite interesting, as where the market's also crashing. So I kind of think that, maybe Bitcoin is starting to more behave like a safety play. However, I'm looking ahead till Sunday. So, right now it's Saturday the 5th. And tomorrow, like the markets are closed. So Bitcoin, it's going to be interesting to see what Bitcoin does. You can see, we just hide these. Let's get out of this. Okay. You can see this is the 1 hour chart. If we go to the 4 hour chart on Bitcoin, you can see that there's this downward trend line, and I'll just put on some moving averages. This is the RSI. So you had a death cross, and I mean everyone was sort of looking at what was happening with Bitcoin. There was warning signs a while ago because you had this negative divergence where price was coming up, however relative strength index was coming down. So this to me sort of was actually like a massive warning sign, up when, just go back to price. So back when the market peaked, this was end of the year 2024, Bitcoin was up around 110,000, and then came down, you had a death cross. It was a bit of a fake out. You had your golden cross again. People were very excited, and it sort of peaked out, I guess, middle of January. And because of this negative divergence where the RSI failed to make a higher high here, and it actually set, you know, a lower high on the RSI, a lot of people at that stage would probably be selling into this. You know, I guess you could call this a bull flag, but it was sort of massive warning signs saying, hey, get out of Bitcoin because things are changing. And it was a similar situation, I guess, you know, where you had the top, where you also had a divergence coming down on RSI on the NASDAQ, and similar situation on the SPY. So where does it leave Bitcoin now? I mean, you've had this, like, okay, so you've had this downward trend line now. Gold has been moving up, and it's sort of my opinion now, because you've had this depegging. Let me just put on the SPY and the QQQ NASDAQ again. Because you've had this, where are they? Yeah, way down here. I'm gonna have to change this. Give me 1 second. Because you've had this sort of like decoupling, okay? So you can't really use that word, but dare I say it, you've had this decoupling. Bitcoin now is sort of saying, hey, I want to get above this downwards trend line. And if you actually look at what's happening, you've had a bottoming, you know, market, local bottom, potential local bottom here in Bitcoin. You've had multiple high lows coming up. And it's still, I guess you'd call it a falling wedge, but it's still in a bit of like a bear flag. But to me, you've got this, let me just get rid of some of these. You've got this downwards trend line. Let me just set this to lines. I think maybe we'll look at, I think I've drawn this on the 1 day. Yeah. So you've got this downwards trend line, and potentially now, Bitcoin is looking like it wants to break above this downwards trend line. It's probably going to do something like this, potentially come up, come down, bounce off it as support, and do something like this. However, that's all good, but you've got this potential death cross coming as well. So I would just say, I'm waiting till Sunday, because the markets now have closed. The NASDAQ has closed significantly lower. You know, the NASDAQ is down 6%, the SPY is down almost 6%, and yesterday it was terrible. I mean, you can see the VIX is just skyrocketed. Get rid of this. And I just think with Bitcoin, you have to be careful, but then also there's nowhere you can really move money right now. So if you're in bonds and you've got, you know, say your 60-40 ratio, and you're already in your safety, I guess, plays. With Bitcoin, there's a potential possibility where this 50-day moving average does not actually meet this 200-day moving average. And it does something like that. Do you know what I mean? So I would say, like, right now, Bitcoin is at a historic time. We've just had these tariffs that all the information's out now. And I think with Bitcoin, just this simple decoupling is, to me, potentially in a historic time for Bitcoin, because let me just go back to percentage, because you can see the correlation. The NASDAQ and the SPY come down, Bitcoin comes down. The NASDAQ and the SPY start to bounce, Bitcoin bounces. But every time the Nasdaq and the SPY comes down, Bitcoin's very aggressive. It's showing in this blue line. It's very aggressive and it's selling. And then it has, the SPY and the Nasdaq have this very subtle bounce. And look at this move in Bitcoin, massive, massive rally. And then the SPY and Nasdaq here, you know, like they start to sell off again. And then this huge disgusting puke. You know what I mean? Almost like literally setting a lower low on Bitcoin after this. Look at this move, which was a 10% move. And then all the way back down to like negative 1% over the span of like literally 2 or 3 days. SPY and Nasdaq then move sideways but up, sort of setting its bull flag, and then Bitcoin saying not negative divergence. It doesn't like, you know, this topping phase of the SPY and the Nasdaq, and it starts to sell off. And then the SPY and the Nasdaq here on the 20th of Feb actually start to roll down, and look at this massive move on Bitcoin. Boom. As soon as the SPY and the Nasdaq show that, huge, huge, huge selling pressure. 15% down on Bitcoin. Again, you've got this like here, tiny bounce. Bitcoin goes, oh no, I'm going to come up. The SPY and Nasdaq could be coming up, and this massive rally again on Bitcoin rolls over again. No, and it's like this very perfect like correlation between traditional markets and Bitcoin. But don't forget what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is an emerging market, and it's sort of saying now, like Bitcoin, because it's moved so down. Look at this sort of upwards movement on the SPY and Nasdaq. Here. It's coming up. Rolls over. Little sell. Wasn't like these ones or these other ones. And then the SPY and the Nasdaq just completely collapse. Yeah, look at that. Boom. Down 12%. And what does Bitcoin do? What does Bitcoin do right here? Right here. It moves up 2.71%. So, I mean, the markets just closed, right? They just closed. Friday close. We're moving into the weekend. So I'm not going to be buying any Bitcoin because my personal thoughts around Bitcoin is that someday when we get to tomorrow, that Bitcoin potentially could do this, boom, and just completely just spit out because the traditional TradFi markets have done that. And, you know, we're looking at probably a 15, potentially even 20% puke on Bitcoin. But like I was saying, you know, just before, you have to watch it right now because if Bitcoin does have this decoupling and it doesn't sell off on Sunday, then, you know, like this has been like for years, like I think over 2 years, like for ages, it's followed the Nasdaq and the SPY. But if it does decouple, it's going to set a new precedent in the market. And yeah, I would just say watch Sunday, because if Bitcoin holds, let's get rid of these. If Bitcoin holds, let's go back to candles. Let's get rid of these. Some of these alerts. Check on the ribbons. Okay. So if Bitcoin holds, I'll probably do this on the 4-hour chart. 4-hour chart, good. So if Bitcoin manages to hold, probably don't need the RSI right now. If Bitcoin manages to hold, let's just say for example, a benchmark 80K. This is our anchor, you know what I mean? Like price does not fall below this 80K level, which would be only a 5% decline. I would say that it's still within that decoupling, you know, hey, it actually is starting to break away from the correlation and decouple from the SPY and the Nasdaq. If it holds at 80K, you can assume that no, it has been successful in that. you don't want to see Bitcoin, because right now we're above this downward sort of trend line. You don't want to see Bitcoin come down and then sweep and then start to do this. Then it's starting to move back into that, that territory of, okay, now that the decoupling theory isn't going to sustain. But this Sunday, there's very, very, very key levels. So you've got 81K, you know what I mean? You've got 82K, 83K, and right now we're at 84. If Bitcoin just bounces, off any of these levels, or even gets above, like say if it did that and then boom, and then just went back up to like 90 and beyond, it's like this complete decoupling theory is going to be proven to be correct. And with everyone that's exiting their stocks, exiting, like the markets, it's like they got a lot of cash right now, and people are trying to think, well, where do I put my money? And I would just say you got to be real careful with Bitcoin now that you don't want to miss that boat, because if Bitcoin does just decide to spit up to 90K, the markets are going to continue their moves lower, and then the Fed is going to cut interest rates. Potentially, they're going to bring in quantitative easing and cut now 3 times, I think, potentially, because all this recession fear is starting to get very serious. And I think you're going to see Bitcoin just move up to that, like those people saying, hey, it's going to 270, it's going to 500K, like these ridiculous price sort of, targets. But I would say my end of year target, especially right now, if we see this decoupling, would be about around 150 to 170K for Bitcoin. But yeah, like I'm not going to buy any Bitcoin until Sunday. So I'd just say be very careful, getting into Bitcoin right now, especially in large amounts. But you don't want to be not positioned in case this happens. So yeah, I just wanted to share those thoughts, and in future videos I'll be giving a lot more updates around, I guess, Bitcoin and more the macro events of the markets, and I'll try to keep you guys posted with my thoughts. But yeah, if you liked what I'm spitting out, please leave a comment. Please give the video a like.